down to town, I often hear stories from different communities as it relates to economic development and kind of about their local business climate. And what I end up doing is I end up hearing very similar things. I hear pretty similar themes, whether I'm in Elbow or Pelican, a big town, a little town, a tiny town, a medium-sized town. So I thought I'd share a few of those, and then move into some interesting information. One of the first things I always hear is, geez, 30, 40 years ago, agriculture used to be different in our community. There used to be more family farms, and now there are less farms. And with less farms, there's just sort of some different inputs in terms of where people are sourcing their inputs, and that has an effect on our community. Something I often hear. I often hear a lot about Main Street issues, right? Geez, 30, 40 years ago, people were more loyal to a downtown business district. They're more loyal to a community in general, and people have changed their purchasing patterns, if you will. And also, people more likely used to work locally. So nowadays, where people are more mobile, that also has an effect on purchasing patterns. So this has an effect on our Main Street. This has an effect on our local businesses. Over years, a number of businesses disappear. So we end up with vacancy issues. So with vacancy issues, we have less traffic. We have less traffic, and it's another vacancy issue. This is something I often hear. And so people are always figuring, how do we figure out some of these, what I would call Main Street issues as relates to local retail service. And oftentimes I hear people talk about people. This is of course an Amish barn raising. It's usually the picture everybody in different chambers of commerces and EDAs will say, this is what we want. This is what and I will also hear, this is what we used to have. We used to have more proprietors locally, people that were engaged in the community, more people that rolled up their sleeves locally and got involved. Some people tie this back to, we used to have more family farms, we had more farm proprietors. This whole notion about we're all in this together and we're building our community together. And so nowadays I hear, geez, it used to be, we had more volunteers. It's a little harder to get volunteers nowadays. We used to have more leaders, if you will. And, geez, now our leaders, they've been at it for a while. Who are the new ranks of leaders that are going to come and take their place? Who are also the younger, newer entrepreneurs in our community? We're talking about business climate. They'll take the place of our existing entrepreneurs and small business people. So this question about people and people engaging in the community, the business climate, is something I often hear about. And so, with all these discussions, often I'm just people throwing all these themes at me and, geez, Ryan, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? We got to figure this out. And a lot of communities are working at figuring this out in terms of getting things going, trying different things. But a lot of times, people are searching for answers. They're just searching for a way of figuring out sort of this tough nut. How do we change our local business climate? How do we change where our business community is at? And I'm always trying to figure this out too, because that's my job, right? So I work with other different organizations in community economic development, so I try to find answers. And I'd like to share with you what I think is a fairly enlightening piece of research that I ran into a couple weeks ago that I think is very helpful in terms of framing the conversation about business climate and community business climate. A lot of times I try to find this stuff and I never find the right answer, but this is one where I'm like, wow, this is good stuff. And the article was written by a team of people from the University of Missouri, and the title of it was Community Entrepreneurial Climate, and it has a subtitle. And these are the authors. Basically what they did is they went to the source, right? So if we want to look at local business climates, let's go and talk to the actual entrepreneurs. Let's talk to the small business owners and operators and ask them about local business climates. They surveyed 158 small businesses in 12 different rural Missouri communities. And so these are communities of a few hundred, population of a few hundred, up to about 12,000 or something. So that's just small, but they aren't out surveying people in St. Louis, right? Or real cities. And the people that they targeted and talked to were in business an average of 5 years. So when targeting people, they were looking for people that are fairly recent startups, business startups, but have made it over that hump of that first couple of years where people often fail, right? So they seem like good people to ask about local business climate. And they asked them their perceptions about what a good business climate is, and then they asked them, number 2, about their own community. How good is your current close community in its business climate? And so talking to these people, what we got is a really interesting insight from the view of small business owners that are fairly new in their business, medium of 5 years, trying to tease out what makes for good versus bad local business climate, right? And some of the things surprised me in how important they were. The first one was good business networks. Right? How do different small businesses cooperate? How do they network with one another? How do they communicate with one another? Is there how much back and forth is there between existing businesses, new businesses? Number 2, this sounds kind of like a no-brainer, but strong local patronage of businesses. It's a no-brainer in that, gee, if people aren't patronizing your establishment, you're probably not going to have enough sales to stay in business, right? But this came up as the second. Number 3 was the existence of high-speed internet access. And number 4, fair treatment by members of the community. Which, again, that's one that definitely surprised me in terms of that business. Right? Maybe it's about low rent. Maybe it's about good wages. It's about wages. Right? But now we got this thing about fair treatment by members of the community. Doesn't necessarily, isn't one something that necessarily jumps right to mind. So what I'll do is I'll go through each of these with some kind of key questions, sort of explain them a little bit more. And as I do that, kind of think about Hoffman, right? Think about how you're doing on some of these things. So a good business network. If you're a small business owner or operator, do you kind of feel on your own, if you will? Is there some kind of a social aspect to different business gatherings and organizations? Time when people can kind of mix and get to know one another? Do local businesses share ideas? Do they help one another? Do they cooperate? Right? Do they purchase together? You might find efficiencies that way. So, also business networking on. Local patronage of businesses. Do a lot of local residents buy local? They have a choice. I can patronize this establishment over there, or I can patronize this establishment over here. How do they make that choice? And two, how about local businesses? Are the local businesses kind of setting a good example, both for their employees as well as other people in the community, in terms of patronizing other businesses, other local businesses? And you can kind of see, I know I've heard this a number of times from small businesses in communities, some that are struggling, and just say, if people in this community aren't willing to buy here, why should I remain in business? People get chippy about it. And I've heard people get chippy about it, and probably rightfully so. And maybe that's even more so as it pertains to local businesses, other members of the business community who take their shopping elsewhere. High-speed internet. So what's available here? What hinders people from using the net locally? we improve on access locally somehow? You'll talk about this Minnesota, I can't even remember, Merck project coming up. You know, so I'll be around in the community doing a lot of either individual consultation or small classes relates to small business use of the net. You know, this might be one way of doing that. And lastly, fair treatment. You know, our new business is welcome. Is there an insider group and an outsider group of businesses? Okay. I've heard this a number of times in communities. I'm constantly an outsider. Does local government treat all businesses the same? Or treat them fairly? You know, do local leaders actively seek the advice and views of local businesses? We're talking about business climate and talking about this research that came up there. And you sort of think about business climate almost like a personality. It's sort of almost like a feel, if you will, right? I definitely see it when I go to different communities. Some communities have a business climate that's pretty aggressive, you know. It's kind of a bunch of go-getters. We can all work together and make something happen. Others are like, I don't know, we'll see what happens. Others may run into their downright hostile towards one another, right? Part of this fair treatment. And lastly, one interesting finding from that study in Missouri is that owners in smaller communities are statistically more likely to perceive their local business climate as being bad. So the smaller the community, the more likely the small business people that they talked to said, you know, the local business climate isn't good. So I think what that points to is that for all of you in the Hoffman and for a lot of the other smaller communities that I end up working in many respects, we're even more challenged thinking about this stuff and how to make kind of a positive local business climate. So, any question? Yeah.
Go back to the one that talks about buying local for individuals and for local businesses.
Yep.
Are there any solutions to that? What do communities do to improve the local residents' use of their local opportunities? And how about getting local businesses involved? Any suggestions?
I mean, yeah, most communities try to take it on as a buy local campaign.